The wind, a hollow tooth. Mountains, bared white. Alara moved through the cold, a small, hard knot of warmth in the vast frozen jaw of winter. Each dawn the same ritual: shovel, snow, test the roof beams groaning under white tons, chop wood until her shoulders burned. Alone. The silence was a blanket, sometimes heavy, sometimes comforting. This morning, different. Boot prints, sunk deep beside her own worn path to the woodpile. Not hers. Large, purposeful. Leading to the barn, her breath hitched, a plume of white in the biting air. The old shotgun, cold against her mittened hands. She eased the barn door open, a sliver of gray light piercing the gloom. Hay rustled. A shape, huddled beneath a threadbare horse blanket. Thin, still. One hand lay exposed, pale against the dark wool. 3 fingers missing. The scars old, silvered. He did not stir. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest. A ghost, a threat, or just another creature seeking refuge from the biting teeth of the world. The wind howled, rattling the loose timbers. She lowered the gun, another mouth to feed. Another winter story, beginning not with a word, but with a silent question mark etched in snow. The cold seeped into her bones, a familiar ache. She left him there, the barn door pulled almost shut, a sliver of doubt lingering in the frozen air. The mountains watched, impassive. The first storm arrived like a white wolf, howling, devouring the world in a blur of snow. For 3 days, the cabin was an island, the barn a distant shore. Alara moved through her rooms, the silence amplified by the tempest outside. Each gust of wind seemed to carry his presence into her small space. Was he still there? Frozen? Gone? She baked bread. The scent, a small defiance against the storm's chill. She thought of the missing fingers, the gaunt hollows of his face glimpsed in that brief, gray light. Too vulnerable to be a real danger, perhaps. Too broken. On the 3rd night, the wind dropped to a mournful sigh. The snow piled high, a soft, suffocating shroud. She pulled on her thickest coat, lit the lantern. The beam cut a wavering path to the barn. He was there, curled tight, a tremor running through him. She set down a tin plate, warm bread, a piece of dried meat, said nothing. He watched her, eyes dark hollows in the lantern light. No fear, just a weary acceptance. She retreated, the snow crunching softly under her boots, the unspoken pact hanging in the crystalline air. He would stay, for now. The mountains held their breath, draped in new fallen white, secrets buried deeper. The storm had passed, but the winter had only just begun its slow, relentless siege, and now she was not entirely alone within its grip. Another week, another fall of snow, softer this time, a persistent whisper. He had started moving, small sounds from the barn filtering across the frozen yard. The creak of a loose board, the scrape of metal. One morning she saw him from her window, a dark shape against the white, mending the section of fence the last blizzard had torn loose. His movements were slow, deliberate, hampered by the cold in his maimed hand. Yet he worked with a strange, quiet persistence. He never approached the cabin, never sought her out. He simply fixed the fence first, then the broken runner on her old wooden sled, the one she hadn't used since before. She found it one afternoon, propped by the barn wall, repaired with scavenged wood and strips of hide. A pang, sharp and unexpected. The sled her father made, the one her brother, Micah, had loved. He'd glide down the small hill behind the cabin, his laughter echoing, a sound lost to the snows of too many winters past. The stranger worked without acknowledgement, without asking. He seemed to understand the language of broken things, the silent plea of wood and metal. The loose stair on the porch, the one she always stumbled on, especially in the dark, he fixed that too, silently, efficiently. She left more food, a thicker blanket. The silence between them remained, but it was changing. Less a void, more a shared space, filled with the rhythm of his work and her watching. The days found a new pattern, a quiet counterpoint of tasks. His, the mending of the physical world around them. Hers, the sustenance, the watchful quiet. He taught her, by gesture and example, how to set snares for rabbits, his good hand deft, the other, surprisingly, adept. He showed her where the winter hares made their runs, how to read the subtle signs in the snow, silent lessons, learned under a steel-gray sky. She, in turn, mended his worn coat, the fabric thin as a papery leaf, her stitches small and neat, a language of care he seemed to understand. He'd find the mended garment folded on a crate in the barn, his only acknowledgement a fractional dip of his head if she happened to be nearby. The fire in her hearth became a focal point in the evenings. Sometimes, through the small frost-etched window, she'd see the flicker of a tiny hoarded fire he'd made in the barn, a small orange eye in the vast dark. They spoke little. A word for wood, a nod for water, but the silence was charged, intimate, cold, she'd said once, rubbing her arms more to herself than him, as he passed with an armful of kindling. He'd paused, looked at the sky. Colder soon, he'd murmured, his voice raspy from disuse, the sound startling in its rarity. Then he'd moved on, but the air had shifted. A thread, fine as spider silk, now connected them across the frozen yard. Trust, fragile as a new icicle, began to form. He handled the old whittling knife she'd left on the porch with a reverence that caught in her throat, the way his thumb, the one remaining on his damaged hand, traced the worn wooden handle. It was Micah's knife. Lost, she'd thought, or perhaps taken. Seeing it in the stranger's grip, a cold wave washed over Ilara. Suddenly, the present winter receded, and she was back. Years ago, the snow falling then too, but different, softer, a child's world. Micah. His laughter, bright as a cardinal in the snow. He was 10, she 12. He'd been gone for an hour. Then too, the light fading. The rising panic in her mother's voice, her father's grim silence as he gathered the men from the sparse homesteads further down the valley. They'd searched for days, the whole small, tight-lipped town, combing the woods, the mountain's hem, finding nothing, not a track, not a sign, just the endless, indifferent snow. He had simply vanished, swallowed by the white, the town whispered. Wild animals, a hidden crevasse, or something darker, something human. But the whispers faded, like breath on a frozen pane, leaving only a raw, enduring ache in their small cabin. Her mother withered, a flower in frost. Her father's silence grew into a mountain range of its own. The snows came and went, burying the memory a little deeper each year, but never fully. Micah. A ghost in the periphery of her vision, a name caught in the winter wind. The world began to weep. Icicles, long and sharp like a wolf's teeth, dripped steadily from the eaves of the cabin, from the barn roof. The relentless white started to recede, revealing patches of frozen mud, the gray skeletons of last year's weeds. A new sound entered their shared silence, the gurgle of meltwater, the sigh of the snowpack settling. The air grew softer, carrying the scent of damp earth, a distant promise of green. The road, that frozen artery connecting their secluded hollow to the town, to the world beyond, would soon bleed open. Ilara felt it, a tightening in her chest. The stranger, too. She saw it in the way he paused, listening, his head cocked to the south where the pass lay. Their silent accord, born of blizzard and isolation, felt suddenly fragile, exposed by the encroaching thaw. The winter had been a cocoon, their small, unspoken world protected by its icy walls. Now, those walls were melting. What would emerge? He worked with a renewed urgency, reinforcing the barn door, splitting the last of the winter wood into neat, precise stacks, preparing. For what? For whom? A tension settled between them, unspoken, heavy as the sodden snow. The quiet triumph of surviving the deep cold was giving way to a new, uncertain season. The sun, stronger now, cast long shadows in the late afternoon, and in those shadows, old fears, old sorrows, began to stir. The sound came first, a distant, unfamiliar rumble. Not the wind, not the river. Alara's hand stilled on the pump handle. The stranger, mending a harness near the barn, went utterly motionless, a statue carved from weathered wood. Then a horseman, dark against the bruised gray of the thawing landscape, picking his way up the muddy track, Sheriff Brody. His face, leathery and stern, was a familiar sight, though not one she welcomed. He dismounted, his gaze sweeping the yard, lingering on the stranger before settling on Alara. "Ma'am," a curt nod. "Heard tell you might have wintered someone up here." His eyes, pale blue chips of ice, flicked back to the silent man. "This him?" Alara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "He needed shelter. Storms were bad," Brody grunted, pulling a folded paper from his coat. He didn't unfold it. "Man, I'm looking for matches," his description. Tall, quiet, missing fingers on his left hand. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Wanted for a killing. Down in Ashton Creek. Happened years back, about the time your brother went missing." The world tilted. Ashton Creek. Her town. Her brother. The stranger's face was a mask, unreadable, but his eyes, when they met hers for a fleeting second, held a universe of shadows. The air cracked, the sound of melting ice, slow, inevitable, and devastating. The sheriff's voice, a dull hammer. "Name of Silas," or so they say. Sheriff Brody remounted, his shadow falling long and ominous across the thawing yard. "I'll be back, with a wagon. Tomorrow, maybe the day after, once the road's fully clear." His gaze, hard as frozen earth, lingered on Silas, then on Alara. "Don't want no trouble." He turned his horse, the hooves sucking at the mud, and rode away, a receding blot against the vast, indifferent sky. Silence descended, heavier than any snowstorm. Alara stood, rooted, the cold seeping not from the air, but from deep within. Ashton Creek. A killing. Micah. The words churned, a bitter slurry in her mind. She looked at Silas. He hadn't moved, his posture unchanged, yet he seemed smaller, the quiet strength that had defined him through the winter months now tinged with a profound weariness. She walked towards him, her boots heavy. The air between them, once a space of unspoken understanding, now thrummed with the raw, jagged edges of the revealed. "Silas?" Her voice was a mere breath. He finally looked at her, his eyes dark pools reflecting the troubled sky. "They say you killed someone." Not a question, but a statement, laying the terrible fact between them. He flinched, a barely perceptible movement. His lips parted, then closed. He nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible dip of his head, just a nod, but it was enough. The repaired fence, the mended sled, the warmth of his silent companionship, all of it now cast in a new sinister light. The trust, so carefully, so silently built, felt like thin ice cracking underfoot. Her brother. The unspoken name echoed in the vast, cold space that had suddenly opened between them. The dying sun bled orange and purple across the wet, scarred land. Alara built up the fire in the cabin, the flames a small, defiant dance against the encroaching night and the chilling truth. Silas remained outside, a silhouette against the darkening world. Near the woodpile he had so meticulously stacked. He hadn't tried to flee, hadn't denied. That single, damning nod. Later, she found him by the barn, staring at the ground. "Micah," she said, the name a stone in her mouth. "My brother." He disappeared. Then, Silas looked up. His face, illuminated by the sliver of moon through the clouds, was etched with a sorrow so profound it stole her breath. "I didn't kill him, Alara." His voice, low and rough, but clear. "I swear on what's left of me." He paused, the silence stretching. "The man, the one they say I killed, he was Jacob Thorne. He knew what happened to Micah." A tremor ran through Silas. "Thorne, he wasn't a good man. He took Micah. For bad reasons." Alara felt the world spin. Jacob Thorne, a name she vaguely remembered. A trapper, lived on the edge of town, kept to himself, mean reputation. "What reasons?" she whispered. "Micah saw something," Silas said, his gaze distant, lost in a bleak memory. Thorn was stealing. More than furs. From folks. From the stage. Micah. He was just a boy. He stumbled on Thorn's cash. Thorn. He silenced him. The ugly words hung in the air. I found out. I went to Thorn. To make him tell where Micah was. His good hand clenched. It went wrong. He came at me with a knife. It was him. Or me. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls, shadows that seemed to whisper old secrets. Silas spoke, his voice a low rumble, painting a grim picture of that long-ago autumn. Jacob Thorn, a man rotten from the core, preying on the isolated community. Micah, small and curious, stumbling into a darkness he couldn't comprehend. Silas, then younger, an outcast himself, drawn to Thorn's remote cabin by whispers, by a growing unease about the boy's disappearance. He'd found evidence, not of Micah's fate, not immediately, but of Thorn's thievery, of a cruelty that went beyond trapping animals. He had Micah's scarf, Silas murmured, his voice cracking. The blue one, your mother knitted, Alara gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. She remembered that scarf. Bright blue, with uneven stitches where she tried to help. I confronted him. He laughed. Said the boy was gone, fed to the wilderness. Silas's eyes were hollow. He pulled the knife. I had to. He would have killed me too. He already had blood on his hands. He looked at his own maimed hand. This was Thorn's doing, before the end. The town's secrets, not just Micah's disappearance, but the darkness festering in its midst, ignored, allowed to grow. The sheriff's story was simple. A killing. Silas's story was a tangled web of fear, desperation, and a desperate failed attempt at a kind of justice. The snows had buried Thorn's body, and Silas, branded a killer, had fled into the high wilderness, living like a ghost, until this winter brought him by cruel fate to her door. The melting ice, indeed, slow, quiet, and impossible to ignore. The wound of Micah's loss, scabbed over by years, was now raw, bleeding again. But this time, the infection of uncertainty was being cleansed by a terrible, clarifying truth. He hadn't saved Micah, but he hadn't killed him either. He'd avenged him, in the only way left. She looked at the man before her, no longer a stranger, no longer just a wanted man. He was a witness, a survivor, a mirror to her own grief, and perhaps a catalyst for a different kind of healing. The morning, and Sheriff Brody, would come soon, and with them, a choice. Not of guilt or innocence, but of what kind of truth the thawing world deserved. The mountains, dark against the pre-dawn sky, seemed to lean closer, listening. The air was still, holding its breath. She rose, went to the old chest, and pulled out a worn map, a map of the high trails, the ones only the lost and the desperate ever used. She spread it on the table. His eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding, a fragile seed of hope, planted in the thawing earth of a long, hard winter. The wind whispered through the pines, a sound like a promise, or perhaps a benediction. And as the first pale light of dawn touched the peaks, you might have seen two figures, moving not towards the town, but away, towards the wild, untamed heart of the mountains, where some secrets are best kept, and some souls find their own harsh peace.